I think there are companies that are definitely identifying their own problems and then equally identifying that blockchain technology can be the solution to that problem. I think there's also many companies who, as a good friend of mine in the space would say, are blockchain tourists, right? So they're just
Yeah.
kind of, milling about what's over there. Let me tinker with something over here, but it's not real yet. And that's still that kind of 85, 87% of folks are in that blockchain tourist type of
Stage.
situation. Yeah.
It's
So
it's kind of like early 90s where you'd build your like static landing page, but like Macy's or Amazon wasn't actually selling anything on their website
driving
yet.
any
They were just
traffic there. Exactly.
yeah. Here we are with the Rare Network podcast. We've got Willayna Banner, former
Hey.
Web3, former Web3 lead for Microsoft, with us here today, still with Microsoft. Thank you,
Yeah,
Willayna, for doing a podcast with us. It's always exciting to speak with you, so happy to share it with the folks.
absolutely. Always a pleasure. No, I mean, I've been hearing about the amazing things happening with Rare Evo as well. So I'm thrilled to be a part of the journey with you guys a little bit.
Thank you so much. And before we kind of like get into day and what you're doing and everything, we always like to kind of start off with a little bit more about yourself, your background, where you grew up, kind of your educational upbringing, and start there. So where's your kind of background for those that don't know? Where'd you grow up?
Yeah, no, gosh, what a great question. All over the Midwest and Texas, actually. So every kind of phase of life, I lived in a different state, just with, my parents' jobs, kind of moving around. And my dad was an entrepreneur as well. And so the family moved a little bit. But yeah, Indianapolis, St. Louis, San Antonio, Texas, back to Ohio as well to finish high school. So it's interesting because after I went to college at Washington University in St. Louis, and spent my summers interning on Wall Street in investment banking in New York, and then of course moving to New York thereafter and starting my career in investment banking, I found that like it was cool to kind of be this citizen of every place kind of thing because you can relate to so many people that way, right? It's like you got your Midwestern thing, right? You got the Texas piece, which if you know anyone from Texas, you very much know it's kind of like its own country a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And then obviously New York, which is the city that never sleeps. So those are also my people, right? Um, and currently, we're living here in Charlotte, North Carolina, so still on the East Coast. Charlotte is really second largest banking hub behind New York City. So there's a lot of transplants, like me that live here, especially those from the Northeast that have been in the financial services space or are currently. And so, yeah, I've been now in Charlotte for 14 years, but grew up all over.
All over the Midwest and all over the country, it seems like. How did you get into like financial and banking? Like you didn't wake up one day in high school and you were like, I'm getting into banking. How did you get into that?
So
Maybe you did.
I
How did it come about?
I know. I'm one of those people that so here's what's funny. My mom was actually in financial services for a while herself in banking. And I remember actually as a kid, I was a big nerd, like always loved school and did really well in school and all that. But like when I was like 7, 8 years old, I remember balancing her checkbook, right? Back in the day, right? I mean, you write down every entry and all that. And I loved it. And that's where it all started, Brand. I got to be honest, in terms of just the love for math and like those types of things. And to this day, fun fact, I like keep this Excel spreadsheet that I've had since my 20s. And I know every single dollar I've spent, where it's gone, it's coded, like all the things. Like it just gives me a lot of comfort to know what my portfolio and things look like. But yeah, no, it started as a kid in terms of all the math stuff. And then, my mom being in financial services, I think is just kind of something that interested me, and just kind of, as a kid, you watch. And of course, my dad was also really enterprising. So I was actually one of those freshmen coming into college that knew I was going to double major at that time in finance and uh, marketing is what I wanted to do, a double major in. But then through my sophomore, junior year, I was able to get into this program in our business school where I could go overseas and work at a company overseas and kind of intern there and also do coursework over there. So when I did that, and I was in London for 6 months, which I also adore as a city, it kind of threw off some of the credits in terms of the marketing piece, and it made more sense for me to switch over to international business. So when I finished, it was, the double major in finance and international business and a minor in modern dance. Because I'm one of those equally left and right brain type people. But yeah, no, I came in as a freshman, like, here's what I want to do. Here's all the coursework that would have transferred over from my AP courses and and kind of like handed it to my advisor in college, right? And they're just like, oh, okay, sure. Yep, that looks right. And I was just like, great. Just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. And
I
often
love that.
you go, yeah,
I
yeah,
I love that. That's
I was that
awesome, and
kid.
definitely some something to instill in my son there, Miles. Definitely balancing the checkbook. I'm horrible at it,
Old
and I
school,
should
like pen and
definitely.
paper, like an eraser, I mean, right? Who does that anymore, right? But that's what it was for me. Yep.
I love it. I remember it. Like I remember my mom teaching me that stuff and everything. So
See?
that's
There
really
you go.
cool. When you got out of college and you were in London, like what was your first job? Because everybody's got to like ladder their way up and start.
Yeah.
Where did you
Yeah, no,
start?
my first job out of college, I was in investment banking at Morgan Stanley. So I'd spent 2 summers interning on Wall Street. The first summer was at Chase Securities before it was JP Morgan Chase in investment banking. And then the second summer was at Morgan Stanley, actually. And so, yeah, went full time at Morgan Stanley. And so at that time, it was like, okay, I want to be in this space. This is what I've been doing the last couple summers. I feel like investment banking, and today as well, same story in terms of the type of training that you get, the type of, I mean, you're just working with these super brilliant colleagues, and you're doing deals and all these things. It is one of the most intense I found experiences overall, but much like kind of the rubber band analogy, right? Like once you're stretched to a point, it never really goes back to what it was. So I just felt like after I do investment banking, there's pretty much nothing I can't do kind of thing. So, that's how that went. But yeah, went into
I love
investment
that.
banking and
What was like a normal day for you? Like for those that, just dream about the movies of investment
yeah,
banking, what's it really like?
here's the thing. Um, it is not that dissimilar than what you might see in the movies. I mean, right now, I'm not going to say which movies, but
Okay.
you see some of these movies and you're like, yeah, it was like that. Like that's kind of what happened,
Well,
intensity and, just all the things.
yeah.
What was the day like? Well, it also depends on what type of deals were going on. It depends on if it was an overnighter, right? I mean, that was definitely a thing. Now, these days is totally right. Date myself. I'm not sure if folks are pulling all nighters in the same way in terms, right? It's maybe we were back then. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely several nights where you get in at maybe 9:30, which seems late, but you're going to be there all night, right? So you're working all day. At some point, you and maybe the rest of your deal team will order some dinner. Dinner comes to the office. You have dinner. You carry on working. Maybe you're, working with, creative services on pitch deck or something, right? I mean, something that's obviously time intensive, but also urgent. And
Mhm.
so there are times where maybe you had to, the pitch was in the morning, let's say. So you go downstairs, you hop in the black car. I've definitely gone back to my apartment, had the car wait downstairs for me, run upstairs, shower, change clothes, get back in the car and back to do it. Now, that was not a typical day every single day, but yes,
Yeah,
that's
but it happens.
absolutely a thing that can happen. But again, I mean, when you're working that hard, you know, those types of long hours, essentially, you kind of age really fast as well, potentially. So you got to try to balance too, right? So sometimes maybe the deal's done or, it's time to celebrate. And so you go and you do the celebrations and all those fun things too. So I wouldn't trade it. I would not trade it in terms of the experience and the people and all the things you learn about yourself, your own boundaries, what you want, what you don't want. I wouldn't trade it. But yeah, the movies aren't that far off.
It sounds like an amazing wild ride, and that you have a lot of great memories from it. And
Yeah,
sometimes you get pushed to the edge, but you
yeah.
also get to celebrate after that.
That's right.
So,
That's right. Like in anything, right? Work hard, play hard.
mhm.
What's your ROI, right? What's your return on investment? If you're going to be putting in all this time and learning all these things and moving so quickly, is it worth it to you, right? So I think
Yep,
that's like with anyone in their career, but yeah.
that's awesome. I'm interested then from that perspective. Not only when did blockchain or Bitcoin or crypto get first brought up to you and what were your thoughts? But then also, like, what were your thoughts of colleagues around that time when it was getting brought up to them from the financial industry? Was it like, "Meh, get out of here," or what was that like?
Yeah.
And
Well,
when?
yeah, yeah. So when I first kind of got introduced or, started reading about it really, and I was just like, it was definitely a cryptocurrency, right? I mean, it's, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin, like, in the top 10 still,
Yeah.
but it had to have been, let's see, what year are we in? 2024. So 2015, 2016.
Hmm.
And it was just something I found myself intrigued by, right? It was like, wow, okay. And obviously it's a different form of markets, right? So in terms of where I'd started my career, as I just described, and then kind of this new, super interesting, but super dicey, right? It's like no one really knows what this is going
Yeah.
to be and what is this stuff really? To your question as well about what did other people think? Even today, rather polarizing, right? Some
Yeah.
people are like, ah, what is this funny money? I mean, that's not really going to be a thing. Had some, close friends, really smart people who were like, why are you even wasting your time kind of thing. But I just found it to be really, really fascinating. And then once you start getting into the technology and the rails of it, as we know, having been in the space for so long, it's been a solution looking for a problem for a long time. It's been, a space that's been looking for applicable use cases for a long time. But dun dun da da, now we're here, right? And here we've got um, the legitimacy of even the most recent Bitcoin ETFs, as we all know, and all of these really major companies and brands who have their own licenses now to be owning these ETFs and the like. And the level of legitimacy there is huge. Obviously, that's on the cryptocurrency side of things. But again, when I think about the technology and what that can mean from an efficiency perspective, um, there's so many inefficiencies in the system globally. I mean, pick your industry, just so many inefficiencies. I also think there's a really interesting way to be able to um, make sure that there's a little more parity there, make sure there's some inclusion happening, right? Like leaning into the technology and leaning into the space for all of us, I think is really important. First of all, to understand it, even if it's just kind of back of the envelope type of understanding, but also it's important from a diversity perspective that folks aren't really left behind. And that's in any type of evolution. That's an AI push, of course, we're seeing, right? And I talk about that all the time, every day, in terms of where different industries are being really revolutionized by artificial intelligence and Gen AI. And so, again, I think a similar analogy applies as it relates to blockchain technology. But in short, there were many who were naysaying, many who were questioning. I think both are valid. All of it's valid, right? I also don't think everyone was going to be right and everyone wasn't going to be wrong either. You know what I mean? So
Hmm.
it's like there's something to this. If we can only figure out, some regulatory aspects, we can figure out how to make sure, things are as safe as possible. And then, of course, over the years, as you know, on the cryptocurrency side, there's been some really strange things, rug pulls and some of these other, right? I mean, some of these other horrible things. And so, again, fortunately or unfortunately, these are the types of things that do kind of need to flow through systems like this to get the bad stuff out, to say it pretty simply. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I kind of liken it to like, a lot of scams in the beginning of the internet and email and
yeah,
stuff like that. And,
absolutely, absolutely.
as it kind of grows through, the legitimate stuff kind of shows and shines through. We all hope,
Well, that's why we're all that's why we're
Yeah,
here.
it's still here. Yeah.
That's what we're hoping. I'm curious though too, and I'm going to ask you a question as it relates to, again, the legitimacy piece of things and like what you saw and what you'd experienced. Was it similar in terms of, if you were to poll your friends or poll your colleagues at a certain period of time, like what would you say the percentages might be of those who were like, oh yeah, Rand, that makes a lot of sense, versus who's this crazy guy in this funny business he's talking about?
Man, I think a lot of my friends in the real world are still on the who is this crazy guy and what is the crazy business he does, and they
Yeah.
don't they
Wow.
don't know like the difference between Bitcoin or what building on Ethereum is or what DeFi is or what
Sure.
NFTs are. Like really very few of my friends have taken the time to learn that. Like yes, they might have bought some Bitcoin and hold it on Coinbase or something like that, but they haven't really a lot of my traditional in real world friends haven't made the leap, and it's almost like a separate grouping of friends I have, like internet
Wow.
friends that are in it, and then almost the rest of the world, it feels like, and I always wonder, like that was kind of what I was going to ask is like in the financial world, does it seem like they're looking at it as like assets and tradable instruments, or more so like a tool of technology to help with efficiency and kind of like help finance in that way with like maybe cross-border payments and not necessarily like Bitcoin number go up, because I think
Sure.
on my side of things as a retail person, most people outside of, when I go to the bar, they're like number go up and they have no idea that like maybe a technology might get used for something,
To make it happen. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
so the answer is actually both in my experience, right? So there's the aspect of, digital assets overall,
Yeah.
and the actual utility there in financial services. And you see many different companies who are leaning into that space, who are getting absolutely real traction in that space, who are creating consortiums of other financial institutions as well, as they come together and say, hey, let's link arms on this in terms of, anchoring on one or a basket of digital assets and look at the efficiency plays that we can gain here. And then, of course, to your other question, the underlying technology there is the blockchain in some form, right? Or at least blockchain capabilities. And so I think it's going to depend, when you look at a financial institution, which line of business, let's say, within the financial institution you're looking at, right? So if you're on the treasury side of things, they're going to be looking more around maybe some payments, cross-border payments, that type of thing. Whereas what we see with more recent ETFs, that's going to be more on, let's say, the wealth side of things, and being able to maybe now advise your clients in a different way about certain investable assets. And in this case, the Bitcoin ETF. And so I think if there's good news across the space, and then even just the layperson or friends of yours, friends of mine who are still kind of like, I don't know what this is. If you turn on whatever your favorite news outlet might be, pick one.
Hmm.
Now, right next to NASDAQ, Dow Jones, you already know, you see it, and you're like,
Yeah.
oh, there it is. They're tracking. They're tracking the
Hmm.
Bitcoin. They're tracking. Now, again, that doesn't mean everyone go out and buy it. It just means that it's has some parity now with these other exchanges to say, here's what's happening. We're paying attention and kind of figuring it out. And I think that's a huge step forward because, frankly, and as you and I just touched on, the level of regulation that still needs to occur, primarily in the US, as we've been, I think, a little bit slower than perhaps other jurisdictions, watching and seeing maybe what's working, not working in other jurisdictions. Um, it matters that all these things at some point come together from a regulatory perspective because cross border payments, just as one example, won't work fundamentally if all the borders that you need to cross don't have regulation around this, right? So if there's 4 jurisdictions I need to be operating in, and one of them isn't allowable, then the whole system isn't going to be able to work together. So that's going to be pretty huge to make sure we continue to push, continue to evolve, continue to learn, right? I mean, there's a fair amount of cyclicality that happens in the space, but then also some surprises. And goodness knows, over the years, we've seen some surprises that folks could not have predicted maybe were going to happen. So that's also what keeps it pretty exciting.
That's always the
Pretty
fun
exciting.
part of being on the cutting edge. You really never know, and you're just kind of, I like to call it's the fog of war. You're just pushing through, and
The fog of war.
as things come along, you're like, oh, that's in my vision now. Here we are.
Yes. Like, oh, that
Yeah,
happens. Okay, could not
yeah,
have predicted that. Okay, let's write that down.
yeah, exactly. Uh, we've
Yes.
danced around it a little bit, and that was really well said. You've touched on like the Bitcoin ETFs and stuff, and like how that's kind of come into play. What are your thoughts on that as like signal with regulation and with the financial industry like adoption? Kind of what do you think that signals to you?
I think it's a huge signal that there's more to come here and that there's a legitimacy there in terms of this, I mean, literal kind of stamp of approval in terms of these companies getting the approvals for the licenses to have ETFs of this nature to say that, hey, there's a possibility that there could be others to come, but at a minimum, that we're here and we're at this place now. What I'm actually really, really interested in personally and cannot wait to see is the what is it? It's the 13F filings that need to come out here soon in the next, I don't know, call it a couple weeks, but little while, where it's from a quarterly standpoint. 13F forms have to be filed by institutions to disclose who's investing in these ETFs now in particular. And so we're going to all be able to see,
Oh
because
wow.
it's a regulatory requirement, the names of the institutions that are invested in these ETFs. And I can't wait to see. I can't wait to see what the list is, because to your exact question, it's like, let's say maybe there's some financial institutions who haven't been on the front page, if you will, to say they're working on something or looking at certain things in the space or looking at the technology, tinkering around, that type of thing. That's okay. But if we're all then able to see, because it's a regulatory requirement, these documents, which very much say line by line who are the institutions who are invested, it's like, oh, well, that's going to be pretty illuminating for all of us, just to know, even if they maybe are not on the front page with thinking about or investing in certain types of assets. Well, here it is, because the disclosure is required. Can't wait, Rand.
I love that. My eyes just light up of thinking of speaker guest list. That's a long that's
Yes.
a long list of folks to pour through and say, "Hey, looks like
So
you're
I
interested in
see here that you're
blockchain."
right. That's right. I see here that
Yeah. How's that going for you? Would you like to have a
that's right.
discussion?
Tell me more about this.
Tell me more. So I really love that, and I didn't know that, and I appreciate you
I can
dropping
see,
that
and
on me.
you're like lit up now. He's like on
I was
fire.
like, huh,
He's like, wait a minute. Yes, yes. So
yeah,
there's your gift. There you go.
that's that's really interesting. And then, like, what are your thoughts on, like, there's a whole Ethereum DeFi, there's DeFi on Bitcoin, there's other altcoins and things like that. In your personal opinion, kind of like, where do you see this all happening? Is it happening on ETH? Is it happening on Bitcoin? Is it a mixture? Everybody's still experimenting, you know? Wh-
I think there's a fair amount of experimentation still going on, right? So, from my perspective, when and personally having been in these financial institutions for as many years as I have, like there is no getting around having to turn in your homework and prove that you did a thing and prove that something is safe and make sure the regulators feel good about it and your auditors within your company feel good about it and checking on the checker and all those things. That's a very, very real thing. And so this balance of tradfi and defi is a balance. It's a hybrid. It's kind of got to be a mix of something. Again, in my personal opinion, because this isn't just going to be a game of zeros and ones and that's it.
Mhm. There's
For
humans
alt,
involved.
right, right. There's absolutely nuance involved. Again, I personally couldn't envision, some of these financial institutions that do again have to turn in their homework operating fully on a permissionless blockchain. Right. I mean, how do you do your KYC? How do you make sure that you can verify who the actual parties are and how things are moving? There's a level of safety and monitoring there that we, I think, all expect from, not just financial institutions, but just from an economy perspective, that things are done appropriately and that there's a level of oversight that just keeps us all as safe as possible, if you will.
Hmm.
But then at the same time, there's something to be said for peer-to-peer execution on certain things, and again, the permissionless side too. And so, I really couldn't pick a particular network or a particular chain of who's going to win out or how it's all going to work. I do think there's a lot of minds thinking about it every single day to see how it could come together. But again, I don't see it being this very binary thing. It's got to be a blend of some things. And again, to the point, blockchain is a technology. And I used to say this when speaking with customers and partners as well. um, you have to really articulate why you're wanting to use this particular technology. There may be a use case that a company is working on wherein other technology could be leveraged just fine. And so that's okay too. This doesn't have to be a technology first conversation. It always still needs to be a business problem. What are we looking to solve? That's always the first question. That should be the first leading part of the conversation. And then you just choose the respective technology that's most appropriate to support that. And then if you're a financial institution, make sure you can turn in your homework later. So, because that's key. Someone's coming for that homework. Okay. So,
That's so well said. That's so well said. And so, do you think then, like, a lot of this, I guess, like, people, do you see a lot of people trying to, like, build for a problem that's not there? Are some of these, companies that are looking into chain trying to, fit a square peg into a triangular hole? Or do you find that people are finding, problems to solve with it?
I think there are companies that are definitely identifying their own problems and then equally identifying that blockchain technology can be the solution to that problem. I think there's also many companies who, as a good friend of mine in the space would say, are blockchain tourists, right? So they're just
Yeah,
kind of, milling about what's over there. Let me tinker with something over here, but it's not real yet. And that's still that kind of 85, 87% of folks are in that blockchain tourist type of
stage.
situation. Yeah.
It's
So
it's kind of like early 90s where you'd build your like static landing page, but like Macy's or Amazon wasn't actually selling anything on their website
driving
yet.
any
They were just
traffic there. Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
That's
So yeah, so there's a lot of POCs out there, proof of concepts here, et cetera. But again, when you think about now, especially in the last, let's say, 18 months or so, the other competing technologies, not necessarily that solve a similar problem, but there's only so many dollars and cents in any company where your tech budget is going to be able to take you. And so if you have to place your bets as a company, you're going to have to place your bets where you think you're going to get the biggest return. And if you have not articulated, again, a very clear business case, you'll find yourself moving to a different investment or to another technology, presumably. So yeah, there's still most in the tourist stage, just like most of your friends are still like, who's this crazy guy and his
yeah.
and his funny money business? No.
No, that's it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, guys, really, check it out. And
You're
some
like, I'm
people
still
click.
here, still doing the things.
Yeah, it does click with a few people after a few years, but I would still say the majority of folks are still just living their life. You know what I mean? And
Sure.
that's totally fine. I honestly think blockchain should maybe be Rails in the back end where like I don't know how my Visa card here works, and how that money moves. Like I'm not that like ingrained with Swift or any
Sure.
of that. I just know I go to Paris and swipe the Visa and they get euros and dollars come out of my bank and we're all good here,
Voila.
So yeah, I get it. Maybe not everybody needs to know about it or what's happening, and sometimes I'm just the crazy fanatical guy.
Well,
But I
yeah,
love
that's okay. That's okay. Well, here's the other thing too, right? So think about even just like you were mentioning with payments, cash. Um, I remember having to carry cash um, everywhere, being in New York City, taking taxis. Uber wasn't around yet, for example, right? And taxis didn't always have credit card machines in them. So you'd have to
that.
carry
Whoa,
cash. That was the thing,
yeah,
right? Now I'm not like so old, if you will, but that's
yeah,
how it was, right? And so then, right, taxis have their credit card machines. And when you get into a taxi, you'd be like, hey, do you take credit card? And they'd be like, yes. You're like, great. So then you start to slowly dwindle how much cash you have to carry because more places can take a credit card. Fast forward many years to now you can just touch your phone, not even your card, right? Touch Apple Pay,
mm-hmm,
whatever it might be, to Starbucks or to whatever you're looking to buy, or walk through a store and don't have to touch anything because they've identified you. You can just walk through the little turnstile, do your shopping. They know it's you,
yeah,
right? And you're connected and you walk right out. But think how long it took for us
mm-hmm,
to get to, like, from one place now to where we are in terms of even being more of a cashless society all up. And I'm talking about in the US because that's absolutely been a thing in other jurisdictions for some time. But just think of how
yeah,
long that took. And it doesn't mean that cash right now today is fully going away. At the same time, if you think of the footprint of many banks across even the world, there are far fewer ATMs today than there
mm-hmm,
were years ago. Why? Because presumably people don't need to take out as many cash items, as much cash, period, than perhaps they used to. So again, all of these things can sometimes take time. So I'm not personally concerned with who's in or who's out or who gets it or who doesn't, to the point I get
mm-hmm.
on planes all the time and I don't need to know necessarily how to take off and land the thing myself, but I do need to know how to buckle up and how to protect myself if something goes down. Like, you know what I mean? So we don't all have to know about everything, Rand, is the point.
That
Okay.
was awesome. Yes, that was so great. I completely agree. And like I think since COVID, it's been a massive accelerator. Like my wallet has
Yeah,
no cash in it. I haven't
that's
had
right.
cash in my wallet for probably a year, and I think that really accelerated everybody kind of picking up technology. And I wonder,
Yeah,
if there's a catalyst in the future that then pushes towards crypto one day or something like that. Because there always seems to be a historical catalyst that kind of pushes something over the line when adopting something new. So
that's a
interested to.
really great point, Rand. And, to even add to that, I think that that's spot on in terms of the catalyst. And it's almost then implied that it's out of necessity, right? So even, during the times of COVID and, folks are having to kind of stay put where they are, but that still needing to be able to transact, that's a necessity play, right?
Mhm.
And so that gets to kind of the efficiencies as well. We were just talking about a second ago. So what a great point in terms of what the next catalyst might then be to move even further down the path. So this is also why it's so exciting. I mean, it's just so exciting. It's
That's
so
why these
exciting.
conversations are fun. Yeah, absolutely, because they can go
Yeah.
anywhere.
Yeah.
And getting into that, like you see people like BlackRock depositing 100 million into Circle and USDC, and like what in the world could they be doing with that and using with that
Man.
is insane. And what does that signal to the world?
I know, I know. Well, the inflows and outflows as well, but the inflow, I mean, they're staggering, staggering numbers. And it's like, how much money some of these companies have on their balance sheet, right? You can pick up the 10K or the 10Q, like, we can all read that. But then when you just start to see these types of numbers being put up on the board with such speed, right? I mean, day after day, week after week, there's all these companies coming into the space, especially into these ETFs, just filling their coffers, and it's quite remarkable. Again, can't wait for these 13 Fs to come out to see who's
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 doing it?
behind, some of it there too. That'll just be really interesting, I think, for all of us. Um, but I don't know. I don't know. I think that's part of the excitement and anticipation of, well, what does it all mean? What
Hmm.
happens next, right?
And you
Um,
see like a massive outflow from like Grayscale,
Grayscale.
like and all of their holdings before with their high fees, and you see this competition for like a race to zero in fees on these ETFs basically. Do you think that that's kind of, is it just going to be the closest to zero wins, or is there a variety of flavor, or are a few of these companies going to stand the test of time and provide these services,
Yeah, it's an interesting question, right? So even if we take a step back from ETFs for a second, if you think about even your own personal banking relationship and how
Hmm.
sticky these relationships can be, meaning very difficult for um, well, a pretty high acquisition cost to get a new customer. But then also, once you get a customer, you want not just, let's say, their checking account, but you want them to also have a credit card with you. And oh, how about a mortgage as well? And then how about your car and then your car insurance as well? Like, how can we really make sure from an offerings perspective? We have a good grasp on who our customers are, but then also create a level of stickiness around, it just makes it such a pain to
To
change
move.
over, right? If you think about that as a concept, which is very real,
It
and has
is.
kind of always been there in financial services, other industries too, but definitely in financial services in terms of that holistic view of a customer and the stickiness of a relationship. Then we talk about ETFs and we say, okay, well, this is actually just one aspect of what could be the customer relationship. And so will it matter that, to your point, there's kind of a race to zero in terms of fees? Sure, that's, I think, a fair data point. But there's likely also other aspects of anyone's banking relationship that is sticky in other places. And so is a zero or almost zero fee at one particular institution, is that enough of a draw for Rand to pick up his entire 5 or 7 tentacle banking relationship with another institution and move
And move it
just
all.
because of this one data point? I'm not sure, but
Or
that's
do I want
probably the
another thing
question.
to my
Yeah.
accountant to have to track another
Well,
account?
that's right. That's right. Right.
You know.
That's right. And so is it going to be enough? I'm not sure, but I would
Hmm.
imagine that if I'm in that seat, I'm absolutely thinking about the fight for, AUM, for the assets under management, like the fight for, getting those customers in the door to create a compelling reason to draw them in if they're not already there. Again, this I think is one data point in terms of the fees and those types of things. But again,
Do you
that the tentacles around the stickiness of the rest of the relationship, I think would matter also.
Do you think these are almost then being used as, this is a very great point. Do you think they're almost being used as a tool to onboard new customers as, hey, you're
Sure.
looking for this offering, we have that. Bring your business here, and then
Sure.
the stickiness of the rest of the operation kind of onboards that client.
Hmm.
Like it's almost
Hmm.
a marketing
Like a
tool.
lead generation type thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly,
that's
exactly.
right,
Yeah.
that's right. I think that absolutely could be true. It's also one of those things as well where in the space of fees across the board, you don't wanna be so dissimilar to your neighbor, right? To your company, right?
Yeah.
Because
Then
again,
it's what's going on here.
well, also when you're thinking about the value. So,
Right.
if that's the only lever that you can use to pull, you don't want to be
Mm.
that dissimilar, presumably, than your neighbor. At the same time, if you're saying, hey, our fees maybe are a little bit more, but here's what you're getting with that. So this is also, an additive value to you as the customer. I think that's also very fair. I mean, even on the retail side of things in terms of different stores, and I'm not going to name them by name, but if you think about higher end stores in terms of their price point and some of these things versus maybe those who have a lower price point. They're just playing at different tiers, and that's okay. But it doesn't mean that the dollars and cents of the item is the only thing that matters. It's also the intrinsic value that folks are placing on those respective items, and then how much are they willing to pay for it, right? I think that type of analogy again is similar to what we're talking about here. One of the data points is the fee side of things, but then there's also what additional value, what additional kind of advisory services, like what additional things can any organization tack on to make it compelling for Rand to say, yes, sign me up for that. Come on in.
That makes complete sense. That's a great analogy. It was really well put. And like
Thanks.
when you see people like BlackRock, depositing 100 million into USDC, my mind, like as a degenerate who kind of plays around on ETH DeFi, is like, is there a guy at BlackRock going like, we're gonna deposit this in Aave and borrow against it and earn some yield off of other borrower? Like, what are they? What potentially are these financial institutions? Do they get to dabble like that? Is there somebody at these institutions, not just BlackRock, but any, that they're like, go dabble away and play around in DeFi?
I do not think so. Now, I'm not going to purport to know all the inner workings of all of these
Yeah,
institutions, right? But
yeah.
again, we have to remember that there's the homework that has to be turned in, and
Somewhere.
there's the regulatory environment in this space, which is still very conservative, right?
Hmm.
And so when we think about the dabbling, we have to really then define what that means and what it
And
could
why
mean
we're doing it.
because these are not by and large regulated securities for banks to be able to play in and to dabble in that same way. And so that's the key because there's FINRA, I mean, there's the, CFTC, like there's these, the alphabet, organizations who very much need to be watching these types of things, but also
Yeah.
making sure that folks are following the rules. And so I'm not sure if that type of thing could be happening, but my guess is whatever is happening, it must comply with the respective regulations, securities regulations included.
I think it's really interesting signal to whatever is happening. Like if I could one day go refinance my mortgage and get some USDC to go spend around. That would be really, really interesting. And I don't, I don't know what the heck is going on either. But the signal of it and the news of it right now is super interesting. And,
So
my
fascinating.
mind goes crazy of like, well, what are they doing with it now? And I'm sure 100 million to BlackRock is probably a drop in the bucket, to be honest.
They got
So,
a pretty big
uh,
balance sheet. Yes.
yeah. So just trying to understand like what folks are playing with, like what are their ideas? Is it to be used in like a traditional banking service level? Are they going out and dabbling in what's happening and stuff like that? My mind goes wild with
I
thoughts,
know. It's so exciting. It's so exciting. So yeah, it's one of those things where literally, and maybe you feel the same way. It's like every day there's something.
Something
There's
new.
some news, something has happened, expected or unexpected. Just so fascinating. And as we all continue to noodle and think about what it could mean, what is someone doing? What's the use case? Why could this be happening? Will it be long lasting? Right?
Hmm.
Because there's a lot of, as we know, fluctuations in many different things, but what will be the enduring things to really place any bets? I think that's the fun part about it too.
Absolutely. Where do you go when you're like looking for news on the industry? Like what's Willayna's like news source? What are the apps Willayna pulls up in her free time? She's like, I need to check the news. What do
Gosh,
you
that's a great question. So there's a few folks on X, that'll come through my feed. I watched quite a bit of YouTube. So there's some different content creators that beautifully will put together the news components for me because I won't necessarily have the time to be able to go to separate news outlets all at once. So I love a good content creator who can pull that all together for me and I can hit them
succinctly?
and then myself go and do my own research because again that's always key and very important, but I love a good medley rant. Right? So it's going to be more on YouTube and content creators that are pulling the sources together across different spaces. I find that to be really effective for my lifestyle.
When I'm sure there are so many people that were like, this was a great interview and I want to follow more. Like, do you put content out anywhere currently on LinkedIn, X, or you kind of keep it
I
more
I
private?
don't as much now, but it's coming. I've had a few folks, Joey Ingram in particular, who I was able
Joey.
to meet through Rare Evo, who's tremendous in so many ways. But he's been super encouraging on how to and that I should do more content. He himself is incredible with creating content and things as well. So more to come, I will say, because I think there's maybe a lot to say and a lot of different conversations to have. Part of it as well, and this, I'm quite sure. The moment you start putting out content, you got to keep up putting out
Hmm.
content, right? And so therein
Never
lies the
ending.
rub in terms of the time of the in the day to be able to do that. But there'll be more to
Hmm.
come. Right now, the best way is just to find me on LinkedIn and that type of thing, and so I'll be able to post certain things there from time to
What do you
time.
like to do when you wind down from all this stuff? What's your like escape
Yeah.
from finance? It can't be all numbers all the time. So as we wrap up, like what's your like entertainment currently that you're like, this is when I get away from the numbers, I do this.
Yes. So if it's not hanging out with my husband or some friends, traveling, that for sure is and all those folks are included, my husband, friends, etc. I love to travel. I'm on planes quite a bit. Then it's, finding a new Netflix series I want to get into. These days, honestly, I'm finally finishing season 6 of like Madam Secretary. Right now, Madam Secretary isn't even like current in terms of new seasons, but I hadn't watched it. And then, my mom introduced it to me like sometime last year. Can't get enough. I think it's fantastic. Finding a good series to binge watch or something, what all of us do, right? It's just, wind it on down that way. You see, there's a stack of books there. I also need to get through. So,
A lot of
reading
reading.
through some. reading. Sometimes it's just throwing on the Peloton app and doing a meditation, Rand. I mean, just anything you can do to quiet
Anything you
the
want.
mind. Yeah, exercise, all that fun stuff, the normal stuff, nothing
I
crazy.
love that. I love
Yeah.
that. This has been an amazing podcast. My favorite so far. It's been awesome to get to know you
Oh,
more
Rand.
after talking for, over a year and being at the event. We've never really
I
sat
know.
down and done this. So this has been really cool. And I've learned so much and I appreciate the time.
Absolutely. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you. Can't wait to continue to collaborate with you guys. So, yeah, keep fighting a good fight.
Thank you. And we'll see you at the event
All right.
later this year.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks. Cheers.
Cheers.